Have you ever been somewhere and felt completely certain that something there already knew you, not recognized you, not encountered you before, knew you, the way a place knows someone who belongs to it, the way a room knows a person who has spent years inside it? That specific quality of being known by something that was there before you arrived and will be there long after you leave, the Appalachian Mountains produce that feeling in specific people, in specific places, and the people it happens to are rarely the ones who are looking for it. They're the hikers checking their GPS, the families renovating old houses, the couples on trail who look behind them one too many times. Tonight, 4 stories from people who felt that feeling and found out it wasn't just a feeling. Something in those mountains knew exactly who they were. And in at least one case tonight, it already knew what was coming. 4 stories, 2 hours. Let's go. I want to tell you about Declan before I tell you about what we saw, because Declan's response to it matters. And his response was not the response of someone who frightens easily or someone who reaches for supernatural explanations when ordinary ones are available. Declan spent 12 years as a structural engineer. He approaches problems systematically. His first instinct when anything unexpected presents itself is to measure it, document it, find the mechanism. He is the person I want with me when something goes wrong because he does not panic and he does not embellish. When Declan said on day 2 of our trip, I think there's something behind us that we need to document carefully, that's when I understood this was real. My name is Sable, I'm 35. Declan is my hiking partner. We've been doing AT sections together for 5 years. The trip was a 7-day section in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a section we'd planned for 2 years. Permits obtained months in advance. The full logistical commitment that a Smokies section requires. Day 1 was clean. Good weather, good miles, nothing unusual. Day 2, mid-morning, I noticed the figure first. We were in a section of trail where a long uphill had opened into a short exposed ridge. You could see a significant distance in both directions on the trail. I looked back at the view and saw a person on the trail below us, maybe 300 yards. The trail visible for that distance before curving out of sight. A figure. Standing still, not resting, not checking a map, not doing anything that hikers do when they stop, just standing in the center of the trail, facing our direction. I pointed it out to Declan. He looked, he said, another hiker. I said, standing still. He said, taking a rest. We kept moving. 20 minutes later, another exposed section. I looked back again, 300 yards. The figure, same posture, same position in the center of the trail. I said, Declan. He looked back, he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, same person. I said, we've moved a mile. He said, yes. We looked at the figure for a moment. Then Declan said, let's keep moving. I want to see where it is in another mile. Another mile. Another exposed section. 300 yards. The figure, I said, same distance. Declan said, yes. I said, it's keeping pace. He said, it's maintaining a consistent interval. He said it the way he says things when he's moved from casual observation to active investigation. Not frightened, engaged. The engineering brain finding the puzzle, he said, I'm going to photograph it. He used the long lens on his camera phone, the maximum zoom, and photographed the figure 3 times. Then we looked at the photographs. The figure was visible in all 3, blurry at that distance in zoom, but unmistakably a figure, upright, centered on the trail, facing our direction. The posture was the same in all 3 photographs. Declan said, arms at sides, weight centered, not moving. I said, not moving. He said, let's stop for 15 minutes and see what happens. We stopped. We sat on a log beside the trail. We ate. We talked about something else entirely because Declan said looking at it continuously might affect our observation. After 15 minutes, Declan stood and looked back down the trail. 300 yards. The figure, not having moved to close the gap while we were stationary, still 300 yards. Declan said, that's interesting. I said, it's not closing the distance. He said, no, it's maintaining it. If it were following us in the conventional sense, stopping when we stop should have created an opportunity to close the gap. It didn't. And I said, what does that mean? He said, it means it's not following us towards something. It's following us at a specific interval. In the interval itself is the point. I said 300 yards. He said approximately, consistently, a pause. He said, let's move fast and see what happens. We moved fast for half a mile, hiking pace faster than we'd been going all day. By the time we hit the next exposed section, Declan was checking his watch. He looked back. He said, 300 yards. I looked, 300 yards. At whatever pace we walked, it maintained the 300-yard interval. I said, it's not human. Declan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm not going to that conclusion yet, but I can't currently account for it as human behavior. I said, what human behavior could account for it? He said, someone with an exceptional ability to read terrain and pace at a distance. Someone who has done this specific trail before and knows exactly how long each section takes, at what pace. Someone who is deliberately maintaining the interval for reasons I can't determine. Said, you don't believe any of those? He said, I can't rule them out yet. But he said it without conviction. On day 3, Declan set up his documentation protocol. Every time we had a sight line behind us, he photographed the figure, noted the time and our GPS position, estimated the figure's GPS position based on trail landmarks. 17 documented sightings across day 3. Every single one, the figure in the center of the trail, upright, arms at sides, facing our direction, approximately 300 yards back. On one occasion, we were at a switchback that gave us a direct view back on the lower section of trail for nearly half a mile. The figure was visible on the lower section. I watched it through Declan's camera lens while he hiked the switchback. It did not move while I watched. I watched for 4 minutes without looking away. It did not move. Then the trail turned, and we lost the sight line. 20 minutes later, another sight line, 300 yards, the figure. Day 3 evening, we reached our planned shelter. 2 other hiking groups were there, a couple and a group of 3. We'd seen them earlier in the day. Declan asked casually whether anyone had encountered another solo hiker on the trail that day. Nobody had. He asked whether anyone had seen anything unusual on the trail behind them. The couple said no. The group of 3 was quiet for a moment, and then one of them said, define unusual. Declan described the figure, the distance, the posture, the interval. The woman who'd asked him to define unusual said, we saw it on day 1. Her partner said, we didn't talk about it. She said, we didn't want to seem, her partner said, crazy. She said, we saw it on day 1. Same thing, same distance. We walked faster, and it kept pace. Then we reached the shelter, and it was there, at the tree line outside the shelter, and then we went inside and we didn't look again. Declan said, did it come into the shelter area? She said, no. He said, just to the tree line. She said, just to the tree line. Day 4, it was gone. No sightings at any exposed section. No presence at the tree line. We completed our section, 5 more days without seeing it again. At the end of the trip, Declan sat with all his photographs and documentation and worked through it one more time. He said, I can't account for it as human behavior. The interval maintenance across variable terrain and pace is not achievable by any hiking strategy I'm aware of. I said, what do you think it was? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think it was something that maintains a specific relationship to the people it's observing. 300 yards seems to be the relationship it was keeping with us. I said, why 300 yards? He said, I don't know. Maybe that's the distance it prefers. Maybe that's the distance at which it can see what it needs to see. He said, or maybe that's the distance at which it wants you to know it's there. I said, why would it want us to know? He said, I've thought about that. In engineering, when a system maintains a specific parameter consistently across varied conditions, it means the parameter matters. The system is working to preserve it. He said 300 yards mattered to whatever that was. It worked very hard to maintain exactly 300 yards for 3 days. He said, I think it wanted us to see it. I think it wanted us to understand it was there. He said, I just can't tell you what it wanted us to understand beyond that. We sat with that, and I've sat with it since. 300 yards, always, in the Smoky Mountains, on a trail that thousands of people walk every year. And not one of them knows what keeps pace behind them from 300 yards. I'm telling you this story on the 23rd, which means yesterday was the 22nd, which was the date carved in the rock. And I'm sitting here telling this story because yesterday came and went, and I'm still here to tell it. I want to say that first. Whatever the carving was, whatever it meant, yesterday the date passed, and I'm fine. And I've spent 8 months not knowing if I would be, and now I know. And I still don't know what the date meant, and I think I need to tell this now while the weight of the 8 months is still on me before I start to rationalize it into something more comfortable. My name is Idris. I'm 42. My wife Camille knows this story. She's lived through the 8 months with me. I don't tell this without her knowledge and support. The trip was a solo 7-day section in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, late April 2 years ago. A remote section off the main hiking corridors, the kind of country that sees serious backcountry hikers and very few casual visitors. Day 4, I was doing an off-trail navigation section between 2 creek drainages, moving through old-growth mixed forest, no path, GPS, and compass, the kind of hiking that demands full attention and that I genuinely love. The rock face appeared through the trees, a section of exposed sandstone cliff, maybe 30 feet high, running along the north side of the drainage for perhaps 200 feet. The kind of geological feature that stops you, makes you look. The specific visual weight of old stone in old forest. I stopped and looked at it, and I walked along it the way you walk along something worth looking at. About halfway along the face, at approximately eye height, I saw the carving. Not a scratch, not a recent mark, a proper carving. The letters cut into the sandstone with a tool and some effort. The edges of the cuts weathered in the way sandstone weathers, not fresh but not ancient. I stopped. I looked at it, my full name, first and last. I want to tell you what my first reaction was, because it shapes everything that comes after. My first reaction was not fear. It was the specific disorientation of encountering something in a remote location that shouldn't know you exist. My name on a rock face, in a section of the Monongahela National Forest that I had chosen for its remoteness, that I had navigated to by GPS, bearing from a trail I'd left an hour earlier, that appeared on no maintained hiking route. My name. How? I stood at the rock face and I worked through the obvious explanations quickly. Someone who knew me had been here before and carved my name as a prank or a surprise or a waypoint. The carving was old and belonged to someone else with my name. I was misreading the letters. I photographed the carving. I zoomed in on the photograph and read it carefully. My name. Full. Correct spelling. Both names. Below it, a date. The date was 8 months ahead of the day I was standing there. Month and day. No year, just the month and the day. The 22nd. 8 months from that April, I stood at that rock face for a long time. The forest around me was doing what forests do. Birds, wind in the canopy, the creek audible somewhere below. Ordinary sounds, ordinary light. An ordinary day in an extraordinary place. With my name in the stone and a date, I photographed everything. Multiple angles, scale reference with my hand, GPS coordinates of the location. Then I sat on the ground with my back to the rock face and I tried to think clearly. I could not think clearly. I walked back to the drainage and I made camp, and I did not sleep particularly well. Day 7, I came out. The first thing I did from the trailhead, phone signal restored, was call Camille. I described what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come home. We'll figure it out together." I drove home. We sat at the kitchen table and looked at my photographs. She said, "Your name is clear." I said, "Yes." She said, "And the date?" I said, "Yes." She said, 8 months. I said, "Yes." She said, "What do you think it means?" I said, "I don't know. It could be anything. A date, something happens. A date, I should be somewhere. A date I should avoid somewhere. I have no context." She said, "Could someone have put it there? Someone who knows you?" I said, "The carving isn't fresh. The weathering in the cut lines takes time, months at minimum. She said, so it was carved before you went. I said, before I decided to go, even. I only finalized that route 3 weeks before the trip. Camille said, someone carved your name on a rock in the West Virginia mountains before you decided to hike that area. I said, yes. I filed a report with the Monongahela Ranger District. Ranger Watts took the report, looked at my photographs, noted the GPS coordinates. He said, I'll have someone check the location. I said, has anything like this been reported before? Names on rock faces in that section. He looked at me in a way that was carefully neutral. He said, I'll make note of your report, which was not an answer to my question. I didn't push it. The 8 months, I want to tell you what the 8 months were like, because they were their own particular kind of experience. Not constant dread. I couldn't sustain constant dread for 8 months. Nobody can. More like a persistent background awareness. The date existing in the back of my mind every day, the 22nd, like a phone notification you can't clear. Not intrusive most of the time, just present. Always present. Camille and I talked about it in the first few weeks, what the date might signify, what we should or shouldn't do differently. We agreed that changing our lives significantly based on a date carved on a rock was not rational, that living normally was the appropriate response. We lived normally. I avoided major travel on that date, which I told Camille was just practical caution, and which we both knew was something beyond that. In the month before the 22nd, the background awareness moved to the foreground. I told my closest friend about it. I told him what I'd found and what I'd thought about it for 8 months. He listened to everything and then said, and when the date passes and nothing happens, what will you think? I said, I'll think I don't know what the date meant. He said, not that it was a coincidence, not that someone with your name had that date carved there for unrelated reasons. I said, I'll consider those possibilities, but I won't know. He said, does not knowing bother you? I said, I've been not knowing for 8 months. I'm developing a tolerance for it. Yesterday, the 22nd, I stayed home. I want to be honest, I stayed home. I did not take the rational position of going about my normal day. Camille stayed home with me. We cooked together and watched things we liked and went to bed at a normal hour. Nothing happened. The 22nd came and went, and I'm sitting here on the 23rd in perfectly ordinary health with no event I can connect to the date, and I'm holding two things simultaneously. Relief, yes, of course, profound relief, and the unresolved question, which will never be resolved now, of what the date meant, because something carved my name in a West Virginia rock face before I chose to visit that area and put a date beside it, and that date has passed, and I don't know what the date was for. A warning that I heeded by staying home? A marker for something that was always going to happen gently enough that I didn't notice? A date in a sequence I don't have the rest of? I don't know. Camille said this morning, making coffee, we made it. I said, yes. She said, do you feel different? I said, no, I feel exactly the same as yesterday, except the date isn't ahead of me anymore. She said, what's ahead of you now? I said, I don't know. She said, that's always been true. I said, yes, but now I know it more specifically. We drank our coffee, and my name is still in that rock, with the date below it, the date that has passed now. And I'm still here, and I still don't know why it was written. 2 stories in, 2 more to go. If tonight's your kind of content, hit subscribe right now. Every week, more haunted Appalachian stories. More real experiences from people who went into those mountains and came back carrying something they hadn't taken with them. Drop a comment. Tell me which of the first 2 stories is sitting with you more. The figure that maintained exactly 300 yards for 3 days. Or your own name already carved in stone beside a date that hadn't happened yet. Story 3 is about a house that replays, and story 4 is about a child who shouldn't have been there. Let's keep going. I've read about residual hauntings. The theory is that certain events, especially highly emotional ones, leave an imprint on the physical environment. That the stone and wood of a building absorbs something of what happened inside them, and that under certain conditions that imprint replays, like a tape loop, the same scene, the same sounds, the same quality of moment, repeating without variation, without awareness, without any intelligence behind it, just a recording, an echo. That's the theory. And for the first 3 weeks in the house, what I was experiencing fit the theory perfectly. But by week 4, something had changed. The loop was still there, but it had noticed me. My name is Honora. I'm 44. Lane is my husband. We bought a farmhouse in the North Carolina mountains 14 months ago. A property that had been in a single family since 1889 and had come to market when the last family member died without heirs. The house needed work. We knew that. We bought it for the bones, the timber frame construction, the original wood floors, the specific quality of old Appalachian craftsmanship that you can't replicate and can't find in anything built in the last 50 years. Our contractor Rex started work in month 2. I was there most days, working alongside or managing the work. The first event happened at 3:40 p.m. on a Tuesday in month 3. I was in the kitchen. Rex had left for the day. I was alone in the house. The sound came from the front room, a rocking chair, rhythmic, steady, the specific back and forth creak of a rocking chair on old wood floor. There was no rocking chair in the front room. We hadn't furnished it yet. I walked to the front room doorway. The room was empty. The sound continued for perhaps 40 seconds, then stopped. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I went back to the kitchen. 3 days later, 3:40 p.m., the rocking chair sound again. Same room, same rhythm, same duration, 40 seconds, then silence. I had Rex check the front room floor the following morning, looking for any mechanical cause, a pipe below the floor, anything that could produce a rhythmic sound. He found nothing. The week after, the rocking chair sound. At 3:40 p.m. every day for 5 consecutive days, I started timing it. 40 to 45 seconds. Every time. Same room, same time of day. By the second week, I understood I was dealing with a loop. In the third week, a second event joined the loop. At 11:15 p.m., a sound from upstairs, footsteps, crossing the master bedroom from east to west, slow, measured, the sound of someone walking in no particular hurry. The specific weight and gait of an adult. The floor speaking differently than it would speak to a child or a very light person. 14 steps, east to west, 40 seconds, then silence. Same as a chair. The footsteps came every night at 11:15. 14 steps, east to west, 40 seconds. Lane heard them on night 3. He sat up in bed and we listened to them together. When they stopped, he said, "Residual haunting." I said, "That's what I think." He said, "Same steps every night, same time, no variation." I said, "The chair too, same time every day." He said, "We're living inside someone's routine." I said, "Yes." We lay back down. He said, "It doesn't feel dangerous." I said, "No. It feels like someone's still living here in a time we can't see." He said, "We bought their house." I said, "Yes." The residual loop continued for 3 weeks without variation. Then week 4 happened. Week 4, Tuesday, 3:40 p.m. I was in the front room, not at the doorway, actually in the front room. I'd been working on the window casings. The rocking chair sound began. Same rhythm, same speed, but this time it was coming from a specific point in the room, the northwest corner. And as the sound continued, I felt something I had not felt in the previous 3 weeks of the loop. A change in the quality of the air in the northwest corner. The specific sensation of occupied space. Like someone was sitting in the northwest corner, rocking, and was aware that someone else was in the room. I stood very still. The rocking continued. And then, at what would have been approximately the halfway point of the 40 seconds, it slowed, not stopped, slowed. The rhythm changed from the steady loop rhythm of the previous weeks to something more deliberate, more measured. The specific rhythm of someone who has noticed something and is paying attention to it. It stayed at that slower rhythm for approximately 15 seconds. Then it returned to the original pace. Then it stopped at the usual 40-second mark. The occupied quality of the northwest corner dissipated. I was alone in the room. I told Lane that evening. He said the loop changed. I said yes. He said, "Residual hauntings don't change. That's definitional. A residual haunting is a recording. Recordings don't respond to stimuli." I said, "I know." He said, "So either it's not residual or it's not a haunting," or I said, Or it's something that behaves like residual most of the time but isn't. He said, what would that be? I said, I don't know. The loop continued. And every time I was in the front room at 3:40, the rhythm shifted when the loop reached its midpoint, slowed, became aware. For 15 seconds, the rocking acknowledged that I was in the room, then returned to the recording, then stopped. Every time, only when I was in the room. Lane tested it. He was in the room at 3:40 on 3 occasions. No change in the rhythm. The loop played at its original pace, 40 seconds. No slowing. Only for me. Whatever is in the northwest corner of that front room, whatever impression of a person has been caught in a loop of 3:40 p.m. in this house for however many decades it's been looping, it knows the difference between Lane and me, and it responds to me specifically. A residual haunting doesn't do that. Whatever this is, it's not just a recording. Something is still in it. Something that sits in the northwest corner at 3:40 every afternoon. And when I'm in the room, something in that loop looks up and knows I'm there. And we share those 15 seconds before the loop ends. And we go back to our separate times until 3:40 tomorrow. I want to tell you something about being genuinely lost in the mountains before I tell you about the girl. Not misoriented, not temporarily uncertain of your position. Lost. The specific experience of understanding that you do not know where you are and that your tools for figuring it out have failed. My GPS had died. Battery failure at a temperature it shouldn't have failed at. On day 3 of a solo trip in a remote section of the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. My paper map was accurate to the terrain. The problem was I didn't know which part of the terrain I was in. 3 days of off-trail navigation in complex ridge and hollow country. The kind where one hollow looks very much like another, and the ridges can fool you when the cloud cover eliminates the sun as a reference. I knew approximately where I was. I did not know specifically where I was. In mountain terrain, approximately is not enough. I had been moving for 4 hours on day 4, trying to regain a bearing, and the light was going. That's when she appeared. My name is Shane. I'm 38. This happened 3 years ago. The girl was small. I'd estimate 8 or 9 years old, in clothing that was appropriate for hiking but not exceptional. A jacket, hiking boots, no pack. She came through the trees from my left, moving confidently, the specific movement of someone who knows this terrain. I said, "Hey, are you okay? Are you here with your family?" She looked at me without particular surprise. She said, "You're going the wrong way." I said, "I'm turned around. Do you know where the nearest road is?" She said, "Follow me." She turned and started walking east through the forest. I followed her. I want to describe the next 2 hours clearly because the details matter. She moved through the forest with the ease of someone who had been in this specific terrain many times, not quickly, not hurrying, but without hesitation. No checking of trails or landmarks, no uncertainty at the various decision points where the terrain could have gone several directions. She knew where she was going. I followed her and I talked to her. I asked her name. She said a name I didn't catch clearly, a short name, 1 syllable. I thought maybe May or Faye or something similar. I asked where her family was. She said they were around. I asked how long she'd been hiking in this area. She said a long time. I asked if she came here often. She said yes. The answers were short, not unfriendly. The specific brevity of a child who is concentrating on a task and finds adult conversation less important than the task. She walked. I followed. At one point at a creek crossing, she stopped and looked at the water and then looked at me. She said, "You have to cross here." I said, "Is the crossing safe? It looks high." She said, "It's the right place." I stepped in. It came to my knee. Cold, not dangerous. I crossed. She was on the far bank when I looked up. She hadn't crossed visibly. That specifically, there was a brief period while I was focused on my footing in the crossing where I wasn't watching her. And when I was on the far bank, she was simply there, dry, standing at the edge of the trees waiting. I told myself she'd found a better crossing point upstream while I was managing the ford. I didn't ask about it. We kept moving. As the last light was failing, through the trees, I saw the gray of a gravel surface. A road. I came through the trees and onto a Forest Service road marked. a sign visible giving the road number and the nearest junction distance. I turned to thank her. She was not behind me. I looked at the tree line where we'd emerged. Nobody. I said her name, the one-syllable name I hadn't caught clearly. I said several approximations of it. The forest was quiet. I walked back into the tree line, perhaps 20 feet. Nothing. I made it out. I was fine. The road took me to a junction, and I got a signal and called for a pickup. 2 days later, at home, I contacted the Forest Service about the experience, not because I was distressed, but because I was concerned about a child that age alone in remote terrain. They connected me with a search and rescue volunteer named Bess, who handled missing person coordination for that forest district. I described the girl, her approximate age, her clothing, the area where I'd encountered her. Bess asked me several clarifying questions. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's no missing child report for that area or any adjacent area in the last year." I said, "Could she have been hiking with a family who isn't aware she wandered?" Bess said, "I'd have had a report. That section of the George Washington is remote enough that we track family parties. Nobody with a child that age was in the area on those dates." I said she knew the terrain extremely well. Bess said, "I understand." I said she was dry when she should have been wet. Bess said, "Can you describe her again?" More specifically, I described her again, the dark hair, the specific boots, the jacket, the one-syllable name I hadn't caught. Bess was quiet again. I said, "What is it?" She said carefully, "I want to look something up before I say anything. Can I call you back?" She called me back the following day. Bess said, "I went into the historical missing persons records for that district. Going back." I said, "How far back?" She said, "Far enough." She said, "In 1962, a family was hiking in that section of the George Washington National Forest. A girl, 8 years old, got separated from the group. Search was conducted." I said, "Was she found?" Bess was quiet. She said, "No, she was never found." I said, "What was her name?" Bess said the name. One syllable. The name I hadn't caught clearly at the creek crossing. The name I'd said several approximations of at the tree line. One of my approximations had been correct. I've thought about this many times. About a girl who got lost in a forest in 1962 and was never found. And whatever remained of her in those mountains, whatever piece of an 8-year-old who knew that terrain and loved it and never came home from it, whether that piece found a man who was lost in the same forest 60 years later and let him out the way she would have wanted to be let out, the way she never was. I think about what it means to be lost in the Appalachians, and I think about what it means to stay, and I think about the fact that she led me across the creek crossing that I couldn't manage and was on the far bank when I arrived, dry, waiting, the way someone waits who got to the other side a long time ago. She'd been waiting a long time, and she knew those mountains better than anyone, and when someone needed her, she was there, 8 years old forever, in a forest she never left, leading people home. Hey, right here, before Shane finishes this story, if tonight's content is what you come here for, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me what you believe about that girl in the forest. Was she still there after 60 years? Still leading people home? Because the rest of Shane's story is the part I think about the most. Let's finish it. 4 stories from the haunted Appalachians. Something that kept pace at exactly 300 yards for 3 days. That Declan documented in 17 sightings and could not classify using 30 years of engineering logic. A name carved in a rock beside a date that has now passed, and the question of what the date meant that will never have a clean answer. A farmhouse loop that plays the same scene every afternoon, but that slows its rhythm for 15 seconds when Honora is in the room, because something in the loop knows she's there. And a girl who got lost in a Virginia forest in 1962 and was never found, and who 60 years later led a man out of the same forest across a creek she crossed without getting wet, to a road she knew exactly where to find. I've been sitting with these 4 stories for a while, and the thing I keep coming back to is this. Every one of these encounters had a quality of care in it. The 300-yard companion never closed the distance. It watched, it maintained, it did not approach. The date in the rock, whatever it was for, didn't hurt anyone. The loop in the northwest corner waits for Hanura and acknowledges her. 15 seconds of something that used to be a person recognizing that she's there. And the girl led a lost man out of the mountains, across the water, to the road, to safety. Whatever these mountains hold, whatever has been accumulating in these ancient stones and hollows and ridgelines for 480 million years. Tonight's stories suggest something I didn't expect when I started collecting them. It isn't always trying to hurt you. Sometimes it's just keeping pace, leaving a message, sitting in the northwest corner, leading someone home. The Appalachians are haunted, but haunted is a big word with a lot of room in it. And tonight, what filled that room was something much more complicated than frightening. Something patient, something old, something that has been watching people pass through these mountains for a very long time. And sometimes, when someone needs it, reaches out a hand, good night.